Hello and welcome to TelecomTV. I'm Martin Warwick and I'm talking with John Healy, General Manager of the Software Defined Network Division at Intel. John, good to see you again. It's a couple of weeks or more since we last met.
It is good to
always
see you,
good
Martin.
to see you, especially as you're not in Phoenix and it's not so hot. And next door to him, Dave Ward, Senior Vice President, Chief Architect and CTO of Engineering at Cisco Systems. Dave, welcome. Good to meet you.
Thanks, Martin. Great to be in the hot seat.
Okay, well, you're going to get the first question. So Cisco and Intel have jointly announced that Cisco has joined Intel Network Builders. Can you tell us some of your thoughts on the value of Network Builders and what it will provide?
So we joined after partnering with Intel for well over a decade, not only on constructing products together, but working in open standards and open source. But we realized with Network Builders, not only are there some of the major suppliers and vendors and system integrators there, but also solution partners and customers. And as the entire world of NFV goes forward, in particular, as well as introduction of compute and storage as part of the network, that's where the action is. So if we need to create a partnership in the industry, Intel has created Network Builders, and it's a great forum for all of the companies, customers, solution partners can come together and build products.
Okay, thank you. Now, John, can you provide us with some sort of key examples of how Cisco and Intel are collaborating together on strategic open source and standards that's leading to the SDN and NFV transformation?
Yeah, as Dave said, we've been working together for a decade, maybe even more at this stage. But very specifically in the world of SDN and NFV, collaborating on things like Open Daylight, the open source controller project, around the evolution of that toward policy and how it can evolve to be capable of providing that level of policy assignment to the definition of and how virtual functions will be applied. We've contributed very much together in OpenStack, in helping to evolve OpenStack along the path of evolved and exposed capabilities within the platform and the technologies. And then very recently we worked on the authoring of the NSH, the Network Services Header Spec within IETF, very much required for service function chaining to ensure that the right level of assignment of virtual functions, the right paths can be assigned from a classifying perspective when you're implementing those services, and NSH plays that role. So, these are the areas we've worked very much together. That's the beginnings of it. It's the standardization and how you help the industry to evolve in a particular direction.
But John, there's actually even a couple more things that we've done together. So we work on OPNFV together, which is a midstream project to be able to integrate all those pieces you just mentioned together. We partnered together on DPDK and some of those enhancements, as well as making sure that there's an open source way to do this with OVS and the Open vSwitch.
Yeah, so exactly, and it's so important that we're then collaborating on the implementation phase. As we move through these trials and POCs into deployment, this level of collaboration, which is why Network Builders is so exciting for us, and having Cisco be a member of that now, we can continue to work together on the deployment phase and the realization of a lot of these solutions for the customers.
Question to you both really is there's a lot of emphasis obviously on openness, whether it's open source, open ecosystem, whatever it may be, but there seem to me to be different grades and graduations of openness. Is there anything in particular which you think is more open than anything else? I'm thinking in particular of OPNFV. A lot of people seem to think that this is the venue, the place for many problems to be discussed and solved. Is it central to everything, or is it just part of the whole tapestry?
So it's part of the whole tapestry, and I described this earlier, Martin, where I mentioned it's a midstream project. And what I mean by that is the technology that it's contributing is an integration of OpenStack, Open Daylight, OVS, DPDK, KVM, Linux, etc. So that means that technology is key to be able to pull the use cases, which were defined by the people who founded OPNFV in ETSI NFV project. So it went from open standards in the production of those use cases directly into open source as a community, and choosing a number of critical pieces. So you ask about the degree of openness, and what's interesting is that there are projects that are generating brand new technology and communities are forming, and there's others that are midstream. And then of course the products, as John mentioned, are downstream, meaning that you're going to pick these up, solidify them, make them resilient, scale, perform, etc. And so that's a general progression, but the lines have been so blurred over the last years between standardization and open source. And what John and I have been chatting about recently was that, honestly, in open standards, you produce what the outcome is a piece of paper, and a piece of paper is necessary but not sufficient. And we both realized that to be able to move the industry and make this infrastructure work, we absolutely had to partner together in all these arenas.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add to that, what Dave says is absolutely spot on. What I'd add to that is that the degrees of openness then are about ensuring that you have open standards that the community and the multi-vendor community can operate with and operate to, and that you then leverage the appropriate levels of open source as a mechanism for stimulating some of that innovation. But what's key is how the partners can come together, like we're doing with Cisco, with Dave and his team, to ensure then that you're on a path to an implementable solution, and preserving this open standard approach and leveraging open source where it's appropriate.
And Martin, what's interesting, at this point in internet history, what you see from network builders and all the open source communities that are forming and all the open standards communities, I mean, everybody's on this bandwagon and they're popping up everywhere. The key thing to recognize is that none of these have been launched communities. To attract a developer community and an ISV community and a solution partner community to open source and these standards, it had to be built. And so even though we're talking about it today and saying, hey, there's Open NFV and there's all these communities, these had to be formed. People had to come together who had common ideas and bring them together. And that's really what I consider to be the truly fascinating part about this point in internet history.
Yeah.
You need a foundation before you can build a superstructure, obviously. So well, another question to both of you. Where would you be, either company, if you weren't in the collaboration that you are now? What effect would it have on you?
So neither one of us would be in a very good spot, because even though we're both from very large companies, no one company can build all technology.
Yeah, I think that's the key piece, is that particularly for the phase we're in now with networking and internet specifically, no one company has all of the solution. The desire for the end customer, the consumer of the network, is that they have much more variety and choice. But everyone brings their assets. We have our assets with things we're very focused on, we believe are extremely important to this evolution. Dave and his team and Cisco have a whole series of assets. So do others in the industry. So we're a phase of collaboration it's a must-have. We've talked about this before. There is no way this can evolve in the manner and the direction it needs to without that level of collaboration. Going independently would just really perpetuate, I think, a suboptimal solution for everybody.
Not only that, John, as you realize, it's not just Cisco and Intel, of course. You build components, we build systems and platforms around it. We're both working on orchestration and controller layers.
Right.
But the actual virtualized functions, those are a huge ecosystem of partners that are out there. And the key piece is that there are open standards to build upon. There are open source communities to be able to integrate into. Back to your earlier question, that we can bring in best of breed, new startups, new technologies that are coming to market, as well as go beyond just networking in addition to that. So anything that has had a hardware appliance around it, of which there's transcoders, there's packaging, there's video ingest just from one particular industry. These are all elements that will leverage out of this current collaboration that we have just on NFV. And so the trajectory going forward, I think, is absolutely going to continue to accelerate this partnership and the ecosystem approach.
I was talking to Margaret Kyoshi, who's the Distinguished Network Architect at AT&T Labs, and she was saying that AT&T want to have 70 to 75% of their network virtualized within the next 5 years. It's a big ask, obviously, and also what is often not mentioned or is only implicit is the fact that for quite a long time, let's say a decade or perhaps even more, there are going to be two networks. There's going to be the virtualized and the remaining physical. What effect is that going to have, and does that play into your collaboration? How do you approach that?
Yeah, it does, and I'll let Dave speak to his views on it, but very much so. You need to have the ability to manage both net infrastructures, both separately and together. To truly take advantage of the assets, the resources and assets that exist in both environments. We need to see more and more aggregation and collaboration or coincidence amongst the network management schemes. How you provision resources, how you provision functions, and how you manage those so they can increasingly be brought together. So there are some very interesting things we need to do around network services orchestration, and there's a focus on that in the industry today, such that you can start to provision across both environments. What will be key for the service providers, and AT&T is a great example, is the need to manage both seamlessly over time and ensure that you can aggregate both sets into single views or single panes of glass as to how you manage those pools of resources across the infrastructure.
So I agree with what John mentions, but when you say the network. Realize that there's many different aspects to networking, everything from the fiber itself all the way up to the compute that's now part of the network as well. What's emerging and what Intel and Cisco have worked on, and John mentioned this earlier with respect to service chaining, is really the fact that there is a physical underlay, there is a virtual overlay that's been created, but there's also a service overlay, which is part of the service chaining piece that John mentioned that we've worked on. That is key. So when we take a look at the network that AT&T, as well as many, many others want to virtualize, it can be rapid deployment of business services. It can be their mobile network. It can be their video delivery network. So there's many different aspects of it that I believe Margaret was alluding to. This gives rise not only to the notion of the service overlay, but of course up into the notion of a full stack, all the way from the operational management environment, inventory, and all the way down to the hardware as well, and all those new layers in between. And the change that comes of this is that an operational group now has to be understanding the full stack and not just any individual piece. And that's going to hopefully alleviate some of the challenges that John mentioned of trying to take bits and pieces, orchestrate them together, have them part of an OSS, and manage them all.
Right.
The state of the art, as John and I were chatting earlier, Martin, is that the understanding that there are compute administrators and there's networking operators and that there's people who do mobility, all of that is absolutely blurring as these different pieces come together, and data center and cloud is part of the network, and the network has to be represented into the data center and cloud. So the operational upheaval that John alluded to is absolutely true, and that's going to be a huge revolution in the industry.
Yeah, I think just to pin onto that, I think what that leads to is a cultural shift within the organizations that have been classically network operators, as they move not just into an environment where they have virtualized compute-like environments and classic networking environments, but one that enables them to move to more kind of a DevOps environment too, where new services can be conceived and then deployed, but continuously integrated and continuously innovated upon in a much faster manner than they might have been experiencing in the past, which culturally is quite a shift in terms of the way they operate.
Final question then, let's round things off. Always like to look forward to the future when you do this, so we're here now and let's see what's going to happen in due course and so on. John, what do you see Intel's next big contribution in transforming the network for SDN and NFV, and precisely the same applies to Cisco, of course?
Yeah, well, we're going to continue to innovate and invest in the areas we've been investing up until now. It starts right at the very basic level, what we do in the silicon, what we continue to do in the processor architecture, to ensure it can continue to meet their needs and requirements from a networking application, network processing perspective. And then how you expose that value and continue to contribute back into those open source projects and the industry forums that we've spoken about already. We will continue to be on that path. But what's critically important in our view toward the industry now is how we can enable this path toward operationalizing and the implementation and what's required for service assurance, what's required for ruggedized services, and in the manner that the telecoms industry has been so familiar with in the past. And that's where partnerships with our partners across network builders are so critically important, that you're moving from a phase of proof of concept and initial trial into really fully blown deployment and working through the creases and the challenges. And so a lot of our focus will be toward that. Is hey, how do we ensure that we are fulfilling the promise of all of this shift in the industry, and that we don't suffer from a long lag of this kind of trough of disillusionment as people start to say, hey, it was a great idea, but prove to me that this can all really work. And then coupled with that is the need to extract the kinds of metrics and analytics that say, hey, this is the return from a business perspective. This is the TCO, the total cost of ownership benefit that you can achieve by moving in this direction. We have a lot of work to do there, and we'll be spending a lot of focus on that as well.
So Martin, I'm going to give you two different viewpoints, one related to products and the other related to technology. Having compute, switching, routing, and storage management in our portfolio, where we're headed with our portfolio is to much more tightly create turnkey solutions that use both the networking capabilities plus compute and storage and switching to rapidly create NFV solutions across multiple industries. And in particular at different positions in the network, whether it's a broadband gateway, whether it's a cable modem termination system. These are edges of the network, but also realize that they're business edges with provider edge routers that have traditionally provided those VPNs, and VPN access for enterprises, but now we can bring in NFV solutions for extremely rapid deployment, and that's the key thing, with as low human touch as possible. So that's a product direction. On the technology direction, what's facing the industry as you bring networking, compute, storage together towards virtualized functions is resource management, performance management, and fault management. This is at the bleeding edge of network and compute engineering. As we know from enterprise workloads in data centers, those are incredibly memory and compute intensive, and we've worked to build systems with Intel and the UCS product for that. And what's different about these virtualized appliances in NFV is that they're also have, of course, extremely I/O biased, and I/O guarantees that John alluded to with quality of service and those features. That resource management, performance management is state of the art. And so the industry must move towards being able to plan, instead of what used to be this hunk of yellow fiber between that router port and that appliance, to now the physical underlay, the virtual overlay, and the service overlay on top of that, such that guarantees can be made, resources can be planned, high availability can be guaranteed in a federation of clouds. So Martin, in one is just how do I cloudify these network assets and network services and still have them a part of the network? And the next step in an immediate chapter after that is how do I federate this? Where do I place this user? Where do I place this business? Where do I place this service? These are complex questions that require resource management of knowledge of the network and resource management and knowledge of the cloud. And so those three big pieces, one product and two technology, are the chapters we see immediately right in front of us.
Great stuff, interesting stuff. Thank you both very much indeed. Dave Ward, John Healy, gentlemen, thank you.